day of mourning. Pope Francis and the world join the French in prayer as the Paris massacre suspects are now identified. Pipeline politics facing an almost certain veto. The Keystone XL legislation moves forward in the Senate. Cold snap. Dangerously frigid air sends temperatures plummeting with wind and snow thrown in. And separation of church and space. A recent study shows our faith may shape our opinions on space exploration. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, January 8th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Parisians remain on edge tonight. Hundreds of French police are hunting for two heavily armed men who killed a dozen people yesterday. There is fear they may strike again. Saeed and Sharif Kouachi are suspected in the massacre at the Paris offices of the satirical weekly newspaper Charlie Hebdo. The brothers were born in France and may have ties to Yemeni terrorist networks. One has a prior terror conviction, and police say they're armed and dangerous. 90 people have been questioned. 9 of them, apparently close to the suspects, are in custody tonight. Susanne LaFrankie has been following this developing story and joins us now with more. Suzanne?
Thank you, Brian. The intensive manhunt is now focused on 2 small towns northeast of Paris. Meanwhile, there has been worldwide outpouring of sympathy and solidarity for the victims and their families. Outside the historic Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, mourners wept as the church bells rang out to commemorate the victims of the attack. Others grieved by observing a moment of silence at a Charlie Hebdo makeshift memorial. The intense manhunt included police storming a gas station in northern France Thursday, where 2 men resembling the suspects robbed a gas station. A third suspect turned himself into police and remains in custody. Meanwhile, a police officer was shot and killed Thursday in a southern suburb of Paris. No word if it is related to Wednesday's terrorist attack. France raised its terror alert to the maximum, bolstering security. Hundreds of French soldiers arrived to aid in the heightened security operations. Around the world, thousands of protesters showed their solidarity, voicing their outrage by defiantly holding signs and waving pens, symbolizing freedom of the press. French journalists laid flowers outside of the French embassy in Paris.
We will keep on fighting with this newspaper as a free city and helping the free-thinking people and journalists.
Police in New York are proactively responding to the terror attack. Heavily armed police known as Hercules teams are being deployed to potential targets, including media outlets and the French consulate.
They'll show up with heavy vests, heavy weapons, and they'll show up without notice. You don't know where they're going to be or how long they're going to stay. And part of that is just keeping people who might be thinking about or planning a potential attack off balance.
High-end, more sophisticated terrorism is how former CIA Director Michael Hayden describes the attack. Hayden says terrorists seem to be scaling back their plots, aiming more towards smaller targets and quick hits. Also, late word this afternoon, Brian, Attorney General Eric Holder is scheduled to travel to Paris this weekend.
Thanks, Suzanne. And Pope Francis celebrates a mass in memory of those killed in the Paris massacre. He decried the cruelty that people are capable of. Speaking during the daily Mass in the chapel of the Santa Marta residence where he lives in the Vatican, the Holy Father said the attack yesterday in Paris makes us think about so much cruelty, human cruelty.
Ha tanta crudeltà umana, ha tanto terrorismo.
The Holy Father prayed for the victims and their families. He went on to say, we pray also for the perpetrators of such cruelty, that the Lord might change their hearts. Well, the Vatican's Secretary of State sent a telegram of condolences to the Archbishop of Paris. In part, it reads, His Holiness Pope Francis joins in prayer with the pain of the bereaved families and the sadness of all the French. He entrusts the victims to God, full of mercy, praying that He might welcome them into His light. The Holy Father expresses his deepest sympathy to the injured and to their families, asking the Lord to give them comfort and consolation in their ordeal. 4 leading French imams and the Vatican jointly condemned the Paris newspaper massacre. The Muslim spiritual leaders were visiting the Vatican this week along with French Catholic bishops. The Vatican's Office for Interreligious Dialogue says the 4 joined Pope Francis in condemning the cruelty of this attack. They warn that the world is a dangerous place without freedom of expression, but urge the media to be respectful of religion. They stress that dialogue among different faiths is the only way to eliminate prejudice. Father Dominic Legge is a Dominican theologian, former attorney for the Department of Justice, and Jean Policinski is executive director of the First Amendment Center, the chief operating officer of the Newseum here in Washington. Je suis Charlie. Would you explain that, Jean? What is the message in that slogan?
Well, you know, I think it's an attempt to say globally that people identify with the staff of that newspaper. You know, ironically, I don't think most people on the planet had really heard of that publication, but once that tragedy was broadcast, I think people wanted to say, I stand with you. So I think that's really the message there, is that we stand for you, with you, and for freedom of expression.
Father, this newspaper was very provocative, even hateful in its disrespect toward religion, like all religions. How does the Catholic Church deal with that kind of irreverent and hateful speech? Certainly not with the kind of violence we've seen.
Well, I think first principle is the Catholic Church is certainly in favor of free speech, but in the context of civil society or free society. So what is a pillar of that? It's the principle of human dignity. Human beings are made with reason and with the capacity to know and seek the truth, and that implies a need for free expression, but a responsible free expression. I think a Catholic response to something like this is with words, is with reason, not with violence, not with bullets. Pope Benedict often used to speak about violence in the name of God as the greatest form of blasphemy. So really that would be much worse than simply responding or simply allowing something like this to happen.
Very powerful statement from Pope Benedict XVI. Jean, we have publications, say the Onion here in America, right, very irreverent, often offensive. Are they in danger now of being censored after this?
They really aren't in danger of any censorship from the government. I think the First Amendment is still unequivocally a barrier to an active censorship. You know, we hold very dear in this country the idea of the marketplace of ideas. The antidote to speech you don't like is not violence, but more speech in favor of that which you do know. The idea of contrarian theory. You need to hear speech you don't like in order to perhaps be better prepared to defend against it. So I think legally we're in a situation in America, a very fortunate one, where there will not be active censorship by the government. The question, of course, is how much self-censorship will go on now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Father Dominic, you talked about, how the freedoms go hand in hand, rights and responsibilities, freedom of religion and speech. How can we as a people foster a better environment than this hatred that seems to be building so much across the world?
Well, I think, what we've seen in France is really sort of a threat to civil society in general. I would put it in a broader context than free speech even, because a civil society or free society requires free speech, but it's predicated on the idea that individuals have a dignity and seek truth, that we don't use violence. How can we foster something like that? I think, a respectful dialogue, a dialogue that is responsible, that aims at the common good. That's in the Church's pronouncements on, for example, the responsibility of media organizations.
We take that very seriously. Father Dominic Legge and Jean Policinski, thanks for joining us on EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. President Obama takes his ideas to boost the nation's housing market on the road today. In Phoenix, he announces plans to lower some mortgage insurance premiums. Despite a rebound in the housing market, nationwide home sales slowed in 2014. Rising home values sidelines some potential home buyers. But the president today says America is coming back, rolling out a plan to attract some new home buyers.
Starting this month, the Federal Housing Authority will lower its mortgage insurance premium rates enough to save the average new borrower more than $900 a year.
The White House says the rate cut will also help existing home buyers who refinance. Now, even with the reduction, the 0.85% federal premium is higher than the historic norm. A bill to approve the Keystone XL oil pipeline clears a key Senate committee today. This sets up a possible fight between newly empowered Republicans, Senate Democrats, and ultimately the president. Catherine Szeltner reports.
I mean, everybody's got their point. Make your point. But let's get the bill to the floor. Let's have that debate on the floor, and let's get the important work of this Congress started.
The Energy and Natural Resources Committee did get to work, moving the bill closer to the floor by a 13-9 vote. But it didn't happen without a lively debate.
I think the American people are ready but we continue to be blocked by this administration. There's already a veto threat out there, but I don't think that that threat should deter us from our initiative, both as a committee, as a Senate, and really as a Congress.
Why does it make sense for the Congress to do something that could put at risk the better days that consumers are seeing at gas pumps across the country right now?
The Keystone Pipeline would carry oil from Canadian tar sands to Gulf Coast refineries. Republicans say this is job creation, while Democrats argue it worsens the global warming threat. The House will vote on its version of the bill tomorrow. It's expected to pass easily, but Brian, President Obama has already threatened to veto the bill.
All right, thank you, Catherine. And another showdown looms as House Republicans plan to vote next week to block spending for the president's executive action on immigration. That vote will come as the House considers legislation to keep the Department of Homeland Security running past February. Lawmakers say the goal is to keep the agency running, but to stop the president's immigration actions from taking effect. The White House order gave temporary relief from deportation as well as work permits to about 4 million immigrants who are living in the U.S. illegally. Dangerously cold air is sending much of the U.S. into the single digits, with wind chills making it feel even more frigid. School districts from the south to the northeast and the Midwest delayed or canceled classes today. Temperatures are expected to drop to 0 or below in southern New England, with wind chills near -20 in some places. This season's snowfall totals still fall far short of last year. Pope Francis met this morning with a delegation from the world community of Yazidi, a persecuted minority in Iraqi Kurdistan. The delegation thanked the Pope for his support for the Yazidi in this time of persecution and suffering. They informed him of the situation of around 5,000 Yazidi women reduced to slavery by ISIS, or the Islamic State. Pope Francis assured the delegation of his spiritual closeness and his support in these challenging times. He expressed hope that justice be restored for a free and peaceful life for the Yazidi and other persecuted minority groups. Coming up, Cardinal Raymond Burke talks about his new job as patron of the Knights of Malta. And using the words of God's mercy from the Psalms, the theme song for World Youth Day 2016 in Poland is written. On Thursday, January 8th, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and it may be a matter of just weeks before Britain's Parliament takes up an issue with serious moral and ethical implications. It's called three-parent in vitro fertilization, creating human embryos from 3 genetic parents. DNA from a mother with a defect in her mitochondrial DNA is inserted into a second woman's egg, along with DNA from the father. It would be the first time UK scientists are permitted to deliberately alter a genome that's passed on to future generations. We're using Skype to connect with Dr. Helen Watt, a senior research fellow at the Anscombe Bioethics Center in Oxford, England. And Dr. Watt, from a Catholic perspective, what are some of the concerns with this three-parent IVF treatment?
The Catholic Church is opposed to all laboratory manufacture of embryos, but these are very radical new techniques which genetically manipulate embryos, which affect future generations, and which mean that the embryos produced do not have full genetic parents in the normal sense. In the case of one technique, actually, these embryos will have no genetic parents. They'll be composed of 2 deliberately destroyed embryos.
What a scary thought. You were talking about human beings here, and so this embryo that eventually becomes a baby grows up to be a person. What kind of identity issues might this raise in the long run?
I'd imagine quite serious ones. We're already seeing identity problems even in the case of people who've had an egg donor or a sperm donor in the conventional way, if you can call it that. But these embryos will either have 2 mothers and 1 father in the case of one kind of technique, or, as I say, they'll have no genetic parents at all. They'll be deliberately made from 2 embryos who were deliberately destroyed to create them. So these embryos will have to look to the fact that their bodies are composed of 2 deliberately killed human beings. I mean, that's you're not going to do anyone's sense of identity, sense of self-worth, much good.
What sense do you get about Parliament, how Parliament will deal with this? We've heard that maybe in the next few weeks they're going to take this issue up.
I very much hope Parliament will reject these techniques, but I can't say that I'm very confident at the moment. These techniques are being sold as something that is benign, something that's going to prevent the transmission of genetic conditions. But we have to remember, these are not techniques for treating existing individuals. These are techniques for manufacturing new individuals, as I say, in ways that, in the case of one kind of technique, destroy 2 human embryos.
Manufacturing individuals. That is very, very frightening. And we appreciate the insight from Dr. Helen Watt from Anscombe Bioethics Center, a Catholic institute in Oxford, England. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I especially appreciate Dr. Watt pointing out that this embryo is a person from the very beginning. A person is a person no matter how small. Well, in this new year, Cardinal Raymond Burke, once the head of the Vatican High Court, is settling into his new job. He recently shared some details with EWTN News Nightly of his work as patron of the Sovereign Military Order, or Knights of Malta.
My work will be mostly with the Grand Master and with his council, and then going out to visit the various parts of the world in which the Knights are active, and it's a large order, and it's very active in many parts of the world. There is also the possibility of drawing upon my knowledge as a canon lawyer to address the complex canonical questions which are involved with an order which has professed religious and then also lay members in different ranks. And those are questions which with time I will help the Grand Master to address.
Cardinal Burke is the former Archbishop of St. Louis, appointed 7 years ago by Pope Benedict XVI to head the Apostolic Signatura, which is the Vatican's highest court. Well, the official World Youth Day Krakow 2016 song is released this week. The song, inspired by the theme, Blessed are the Merciful. The lyrics use words from Scripture, defining God as merciful. World Youth Day 2016 will be in Krakow, Poland, where St. Faustina Kowalska spread the message of the Divine Mercy devotion. Up next, designing sacred spaces, we show you some of the finest religious architecture. And to infinity and beyond, how our faith informs our openness to space exploration. We're very grateful you could join us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Michael Crosby is editor-in-chief of Faith Inform, an interfaith journal on religion, art, and architecture, joining us through Skype from Essex, Connecticut tonight. Mike, you're an architect. What would you say goes into designing a really beautiful sacred space?
Well, I think it's important for the architect and all the artisans working on the building to really pay attention to the congregation, what the congregation's needs are, what the clergy's feelings are about the building, what their history is, the sort of family of that congregation. And I think if an architect really pays attention to those things and really listens, the creation of a great sacred space is something that's really a collaborative nature.
Yeah, it feels like a real calling as I think about it. And your journal sponsors a contest for religious architecture. Can you tell us about some of the submissions this year that really impressed you?
Yeah, we had a jury of 5. We have a different jury every year that looks at the entries. It's a multi-day process. And one of the things that really impressed them this year was with the very, very high quality of submissions. Typically, the jury gives out maybe 15 or 20 awards. This year, they gave out 32. They were that impressed with the quality of the work this year. And these projects come from all over the world.
And many of these are Roman Catholic spaces, some of the winners. For instance, the residence for the Sisters of St. Joseph in Toronto. Can you give us an example of what makes this a great sacred space?
Yeah. This is a space that actually I've been in myself, and it is really incredible the way this space frames the views of the landscape that are right out those windows. The architects were very, very conscientious about how this building would place one in the setting, the sort of natural setting, so one could really sort of take in God's creation while taking part in the Mass and being part of a prayerful community. What's really also wonderful about this space is that because many of these nuns are retired and are in wheelchair and have mobility problems, the upper level, which connects directly to the residential side of the building, allows them to take part in the Mass as well.
Well, what a beautiful setting there, and certainly a lot of work and thought went into that. Do you see any trends out there this year when it comes to sacred spaces and designs?
Yeah. One thing that seemed to be very, very strong, and the jury picked up on this, was the way that many of these buildings are trying to work with traditions in the faith, in the particular faith. I think the Lady Chapel at Salve Regina, Our Lady of Mercy Chapel, is a very, very good indication of that. Here's a building that really picks up on the tradition of the architecture in Newport, Rhode Island. But when you go inside, it really creates a wonderful community space for the Salve Regina college community.
Yeah, we appreciate all that you've shared with us in some beautiful pictures from Faith and Form, an interfaith journal on religion, art, and architecture. The editor-in-chief, Michael Crosby, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
And NASA contractor SpaceX will try again on Saturday to launch a resupply mission to the International Space Station. A problem with one of the rockets canceled Tuesday's launch attempt at the last minute. The delivery of groceries and other supplies was originally scheduled before Christmas, but it's been delayed twice now. SpaceX is one of two private companies used by NASA to keep the space station stocked with food and other necessities. Well, a recent study shows how we feel about space exploration might depend on our faith. Wyatt Goolsby breaks down the study, looking at what it says about Catholics.
Brian, these are two topics most people don't usually connect, your religion and your opinion on space exploration. But a study out of the University of Dayton shows there is a link. Could how you worship really shape how open you are to exploring the cosmos?
2, 1, and liftoff.
Yes, according to Separation of Church and Space, a study by Professor Joshua Ambrosius. He compiled the numbers from multiple surveys. According to his research, Jews and members of Eastern traditions tend to be the most open and interested in space exploration, while evangelical Christians tend to be less interested and less supportive.
I don't know fully what the cause of that is. This study is sort of a first step in establishing where religions stand and what religious beliefs and behaviors influence support for space.
One caveat, many evangelical congregations are more open to space exploration if their pastor voices support. As for Catholics, Ambrosius found them most supportive of the U.S. taking a lead role in space exploration.
Catholics stood out as being more likely to believe that we will discover life elsewhere in the universe at some point in the near future.
To many, the idea of a church open to exploring space and finding aliens may seem strange, but not for this Vatican astronomer.
It is an important part of being human to ask, who are we? How do we fit into this bigger universe?
Brother Guy Consolmagno works in the Vatican's own observatory. Inside, you'll find items related to the Catholic Church's support of science throughout history. They've even offered international classes in chemistry. Brother Consolmagno recently co-authored the book, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? One of many questions he gets asked in the Vatican. His answer? Yes, but only if she asks.
We talk about these questions not only to give what scientific answers we can give, but also to explore the question behind the question. Why are people asking us these questions? What are they really concerned about?
For Brother Consolmagno, asking those questions are steps in the right direction. For him, faith and space are ways to better understand God and creation. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
It's exciting to find out what's out there as long as we remember everything is created by God. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night, and may God bless you.